Okay, hi. Welcome to Coinscrum's Meet the Founders interview series. I'm Yatu, an anthropologist working in the crypto space. And today I'm joined by Jason Eisen, co-founder of UTU.
Hey
Hope I said
everybody.
that. Hey, hope I said that right. Okay, so Jason, so we're here to learn a little bit about your project and how you've come to the crypto world. I think you've come to the crypto world from a super interesting angle based on trust. But before we get there, can you say a little bit about your journey and and how you got here, basically?
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here and talk about Utu and our journey, and most importantly, talk about kind of our mission around digital trust. So yeah, by way of introduction, hi, I'm Jason. I'm originally from the US. I grew up between sort of Boston and Nashville, and then spent about 10 years in Washington, D.C., first for university. And then I was working at a consulting firm doing a lot of like big donor projects, USAID and World Bank and the like. And through that work, I started getting exposed and traveling to East Africa, I guess back in 2010 is when that started. Visiting Kenya, Uganda, and South Sudan, working on programs around governance, around natural resource management and economic growth. And the common theme in all those trips was I was just falling in love with Nairobi. I was seeing this amazing tech ecosystem in its like earliest stages, you could say, in Kenya. And I was fascinated by some of the projects I was seeing and the problems people were trying to solve and the solutions that they were coming to solve those problems. And as a kind of working as a consultant on these donor projects, was super excited to partner with them. And through this, started thinking more broadly and got had this idea basically to start at the time the first taxi app anywhere in Africa, based on a bunch of problems that I had had with taxis every time I was there, and what I observed from others, everybody I knew in Nairobi, problems they had had with transport. And yeah, I had this idea to start basically Uber for Africa back in the early days. This is late 2012, early 2013. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And 2 months later, I quit my job and moved to Nairobi to start this. And a company is called Maramoja. Like I said, we were the first taxi app on the continent. And we realized pretty early into that process that we were basically building the wrong thing. We were building something similar to Uber, solving the same problem, like how do I get a taxi? And turns out nobody in Nairobi at the time had the problem, how do I get a taxi? They had the problem, how do I get a taxi that I actually trust?
Mhm.
And this issue about trust was really critical. And we would show people prototypes of our app, and they said, why would I use your app? I have my guy. What do you mean you have your guy? Well, anytime I need a ride, I call my guy, and he's always there for me, Benson. And if he's not available, he sends me his other guy called David, and anyone Ben sends me, I'll trust. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. What about if he doesn't answer the phone? Oh, well, then I call my sister, and she sends me her taxi guy. He's called Paul. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So we heard that a couple thousand times and started asking a different question. Well, how would you actually solve that problem? And why is it that no taxi app in the world was built with this in mind, this idea that a driver is a person and not a commodity, that you just change one for the other? We said, well, at the time, all those taxi apps were built in places like London and California, where a taxi kind of is a commodity. You just want the closest, fastest one, right? And we said, what would it actually look like if you reconceptualize this from the ground up for a place like Nairobi, where trust was the most important factor? And we arrived at this concept of a socially powered taxi app that could understand from your phone book, from your Facebook, who are your taxi guys that you normally use, who are your friends, who are your friends' taxi guys, who are your taxi guys' trusted colleagues, and so on and so forth, and connect people to this sort of personally trusted ride. And this ended up having a great impact on the business. And people started reaching out to us over time saying, this trust-based approach to taxis, that's how taxis work in my country. And then could we license this technology? And then people would come saying, we run an app for housekeepers in another country, or for dating, or for doctors, or for financial services and micro lending, or for any number of different things. And they all said the same thing. We have this big problem around trust. Can you guys help us? And this was sort of the evolution of UTU from this very narrow use case that we had developed this specific tech to solve our own problem, to transforming that into global scale infrastructure that can become the trust infrastructure of the entire internet, and working across sectors and across platforms and across countries. And it was this that first led us even to the thinking around decentralization, as we started to realize the size and scale and importance of trust infrastructure, and a better form of trust infrastructure to govern transactions online. And we started thinking about how precious that is, and how sensitive and risky it is as well, that it needs to be serving the public benefit in perpetuity. And the only way to really protect that service from that, from any sort of co-option or corruption, it would be to decentralize it in the long term. And so we set upon this path of trying to build a decentralized trust infrastructure for the internet, with the idea being, basically, you could say our mission is to bridge the gap between how people trust in the real world and how they're asked to trust online. So maybe I can leave it there.
Yeah.
That's sort of the
That's
origin.
good. That's good. It's good to know where you're coming from this kind of building trust infrastructure is trust infrastructures in Nairobi. So you come with this background and you've landed in the crypto world and the blockchain world. So what do you see? What, as someone who's worked in, trust technologies from kind of a different perspective, how do you read the crypto landscape?
Sure. So it's dangerous out there, right? There's
Mhm.
scams, there's fake personas, there's every sort of trap you can fall into. And it's tough for the average person, let alone, okay, it's tough for a specialist or an expert to always avoid falling into some of these things. How does an average person transact in an environment like that? And so I think in crypto, even where we talk about things being trustless, there is an element of trust involved, that there's another human on the end of a transaction often, and some real world service or action that ultimately needs to be provided or delivered. And so while we might be able to say that the exchange of value, like the technical exchange of value, is trustless, the human on the other side that you select to do that service for you, whatever it might be, in a future where we're hiring all manner of services from a decentralized protocol or platform or a DApp. Maybe it's a nanny or a loan from a DeFi protocol, or a
Mhm.
babysitter, or who knows what it could be. But how do we actually make a level of trust that the average person can feel comfortable to transact there? So that's kind of what we're after. And we're not just, it's important to say that we don't just think about the crypto space. We think about the entire internet at large. So
Mhm.
centralized services, gig economy platforms, marketplaces, all of this sharing economy, anywhere where you interact with ratings, with feedback, with recommendations, anywhere where you're exposed to risk online, really. If you think about like trust as the corollary to risk, right? The more
Mhm.
risk I feel, the more trust I want. So we focus on sectors where people feel a lot of risk, things like their home, their family, their health, their business, their assets. So while we definitely have this home in the crypto world because of the enabling technology that blockchain and crypto allows us to kind of have this holistic vision for trust infrastructure that
Mhm.
doesn't just address maybe like a technical challenge, but also a human challenge around this. That's how we think about it, but really our service is designed for the whole world.
Nice. Okay, so crypto is just one kind of implementation. So thinking more materially and, in terms of giving examples,
Yeah,
how does Utu kind of interact with can or does interact with the crypto world at the moment, just
sure.
through examples?
Sure. So there's a couple things I would say. Like, I mean, the decentralized architecture is kind of foundational to our model. The
Mhm.
idea being that we don't want to own anybody's data. That's not our business model. We believe in data as a human right, and that this data should be put in service of the people to whom it belongs, and serving their objectives and under their control in terms of who accesses it and how and when and for what purposes and under what terms, right?
Mhm.
So their decentralized architecture lets us kind of manage that and implement that according to our beliefs and our vision and our values. Secondly, I mentioned earlier that there's a technical problem around trust online. So there's a theory of trust that we think is broken, and I can come back to that in a minute. But there's also incentives around trust that are totally broken. And the token model that we've designed really is meant to solve that. The economic incentives around digital trust are totally perverted. There are lots of economic benefits for manipulating digital trust. I can run a review farm, I can run a bot army, and I can charge people lots of money to use that service. I've not created any real value. I've just manipulated people's perception and trust of a project or of a person, of a service. And it actually works, right? So the guy who hires that fake review farm or bot army, his product or service actually gets some more attention. Meanwhile, projects and people that focus on creating real value and don't do this, maybe they sit on the sidelines without as much attention. There's no consolation prize for being a good person and building trust organically on the internet right now. So our token model was designed to basically flip those economics and eliminate the ability of people to buy trust and provide an avenue for people that build trust online to have an economic output from that. So you can only earn our token, our UTU Trust token, by participating in the ecosystem, by sharing data, by making endorsements that ultimately benefit others that get good services and endorse those services onward. Likewise, there's a penalty if you endorse bad services that end up being disapproved of by many people. You would lose some of the tokens that you staked on those endorsements. So you can not buy in to get those tokens. You can only participate. So that eliminates this ability of people buying trust, right? And then on the other hand, as you accumulate tokens from providing data and from helping people get those good outcomes, you can actually earn more tokens, which you can convert into our crypto. It's a one-way convertible. So there's basically an ability to get to our UTU coin, which is freely tradable. And so you can't buy in, but you can earn out. So this is one of the kind of core design features that we came with to solve for the manipulation. But maybe in terms of how you might actually interact with this in the short term, we're releasing our kind of V0 UTU for DeFi product this week. Which will be sort of a basic DeFi portal app. There's actually a sneak preview video that we released on YouTube end of last week. People can check that out. But we'll be releasing that V0 this week. And essentially, it will be a portal where you can see which DeFi protocols, wallets that you've interacted with have interacted with in what ways. So if you've named those wallets, we'll be able to show you things like specific identifying information. So-and-so, this person that you've interacted with has provided liquidity in this amount for these tokens on this DeFi protocol, things like this, even getting into staking on protocols themselves and the trustworthiness of them. And beyond, getting into how can we actually open up the DeFi sector to many more users. Right now, there's a very small set of users that have an interest to put in 150% collateral to be able to access a DeFi loan. But how big does that pool of target users become when the collateralization requirement is 50% instead of 150? And so bringing that trust layer, trust for the trustless, as we often say, can help us bring those rates down, improve the economics for all sides, and basically open the industry up massively to a wider audience. So, but we're sector agnostic in the long term, so it's sort of one near-term example of where you can interact with it, kind of this week, next week.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. Just kind of seeing this kind of trust, using this trust portal in kind of the DeFi world to kind of, so that more people can gain access to this kind of world. That's kind of interesting. And yeah, I have so many questions, but let's start with, for example, how does this kind of work when there's not so much data that you have to kind of go on these kind of new kind of crypto projects and new blockchain projects where, you know, it's just starting up and there aren't many people to have this kind of friend through friend kind of trust system.
Sure. Yeah, people ask this a lot, like the cold
Mhm.
start problem, right? How do you
Yeah.
overcome this? And there's a couple things I would say. One is that we are all way more deeply connected than we think we are. So if you just look at, say, your phone book, your Facebook, and your LinkedIn, I would argue probably maybe you have 1,000 people, average person, someone like that has maybe 1,000, a couple thousand on each of these. So let's say it's like 1,000 on each platform.
Mhm.
And so you have 3,000 people. Maybe there's some overlap between them. So let's call it 2,500 people. And each of those 2,500 people probably have about 2,500 people. So your second level network already is about 2,500 to the 2,500th power. It's a lot of people that you have just in your second level network. And if you think about how similar you probably are to a lot of the people in your network in different ways, you probably have a heavy grouping in the city where you live, in the country where you live, in the sector that you work, in the interest areas that you have. And so the likelihood that somebody from within those 2,500 to the 2,500th power people that are just within that two-level network of yours happen to have a similar interest and have used a similar service to what you might be interested in today. It's really strong likelihood. So the larger scale a marketplace, the harder it is for us to work. Certainly it's easier for us to work at the local, maybe city level marketplace comparing to a national or a continental or a global market because of that density of connections. But there's ways to overcome that. You start with satellite pockets of local services in different markets, and you build up different pockets of data until they intersect and overlap with each other across markets and across sectors. And
Mhm.
so we've not really had that cold start problem nearly as much as you might think.
Mhm.
Um, and what's nice about it is, on the other hand, whereas, say, typical trust solutions that are on the market, say like a, I don't know, Google reviews,
Mhm.
Yelp, TripAdvisor, Trustpilot, all of these things essentially lose their trustworthiness as they scale. There's an inverse relationship to how many random users there are and how much I actually trust this platform. So not to say that all the content on TripAdvisor is bad or all the content on Google reviews is bad. It's just that the relevant comment for me might be 27 pages deep, and their business model is such that maybe the bad comments have been removed because the restaurant or the hotel paid for this. So there's a lot of problems, not to mention that they're public platforms. So you can
Mhm.
create one account and leave one review, whether it was real or not. You can also create
Mhm.
1,000 accounts and leave 1,000 reviews, and they'll all tout that they have these AI systems to remove this, but you still need to figure out how. There's still a lot of work to actually cleanse the system from these things, and it's not perfect. Everybody's seen
Mm.
like TripAdvisor or this restaurant in London that went to number one that didn't even exist,
Mhm.
for instance. And so moving all of this review content to behind a transaction wall, making it part of the infrastructure that people interact with directly on a platform, prevents that loss of fidelity as you scale. All of this is real content. And then the fact that we're basically curating what's shown to the user according to relevance means that even if there's 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 100 million users, the most relevant review for you, say from your sister or your roommate or your friend who's really smart on those topics, is still the thing that's going to come to the surface for you.
Mm.
And so there's no breakdown or kind of conflictive dynamic between scale and trust in our model.
What about for, so just briefly, just I think you touched on it maybe, but just for businesses who are kind of entering in this kind of network, would like new projects kind of find it difficult to kind of get involved, or did new drivers in Nairobi kind of find it difficult to kind of get a foothold in this kind of system?
No, because in fact, it actually gives people a lot more agency as like a gig worker. to be able to discriminate yourself and not become commoditized, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the downsides of a lot of the gig platforms is the commoditization of people that are providing a service who, in a previous iteration of that economy, they maybe had their own client list and they were able to distinguish themselves by providing better service than the average taxi and this and that. But in today's market, where you're defined by some 5-star rating from an aggregated group of anonymous people that we don't even understand why they rated you 5 stars. So, for instance, we can't agree. For me, a 5-star taxi ride is a guy that drives fast, plays loud music, and lets me smoke cigarettes in his car.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody else, that's a 1-star taxi ride. So
Mm-hmm.
we can't even agree what is 5 stars without the context of from who and for what reasons. And so service providers are super eager to adopt this because of the way it lets them discriminate themselves from their in-platform competition often.
Okay, interesting. Um, okay, so just moving on to kind of the UTU token.
Yeah.
So that's its price is determined by the market as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the
Uh,
UTU coin, the
yeah.
UTU trust token is basically the native token of our system,
Hmm.
and it's not transferable. And there's a daily auction, like a limited daily auction mechanism to convert from UTU token into UTU coin.
Hmm.
But UTU coin is market driven, yeah.
Okay, UTU. How does that impact is there an impact on trust model there, just from the value of the coin?
No. So again, because that coin is essentially an output model or an output of the trust model. So your people can buy that coin on
Hmm.
the open market. It's also minted from the running of our protocol, though. It's part of the daily auction conversion, right, from the UTU
Mm.
trust tokens. It provides that avenue for people to claim that economic incentive for building trust. Because we also accept payment and have some governance functions
Hmm.
based on that UTU coin, you could say that its price is basically largely determined by the value of the network that we're building and how many places are accepting it. And how many people want to get these recommendations. So we've already done quite a number of partnerships, like with the UTU is available in our mobility network across Africa. We recently announced a partnership with, for instance, Travala.com
Hmm.
to make UTU coin a payment mechanism for global travel and things like this. We have this DeFi portal where people will be able to unlock their kind of UTU endorsements or the UTU recommendations around which portals their network has used with paying some tokens. So there's all of these sorts of things.
That's interesting. Sorry, I'm just going to ask some kind of like new kind of questions. So you talked a bit about kind of manipulations of systems that like kind of trust pilots and Google reviews and all those things kind of have as well. Are there any kind of what are the kind of problems that maybe you're facing in this kind of in your kind of trust model? Like, is it prone to being gamed? I feel like most kind of trust things are likely to be gamed. And how is kind of your coin and token kind of system resilient to
Yeah.
that, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's the kind of the actual game theoretical model, which
Mm.
creates the economic incentives for people to behave. But then there's the intrinsic model of the fact that we're mostly focusing on showing endorsements to very closely affiliated people, right? So in today's model, if I'm a review farm, I can push all these reviews out, and they get shown to everybody on the internet equally, right? In the UTU model, you would have to have built out that social network to be able to get to all those people with that fake review content, because the review farm content is going to be fighting for a better position against the review that was left by the user's friend or sister or uncle or college roommate or anything like this. And so there's this intrinsic motivation to be honest with your digital feedback, because the people that you're going to hurt or help with it are the people that you actually know and trust and care about. So there's no incentive to provide false information. It's your mom who's going to be tricked by whatever fake review that you provided. So you have this kind of human element to it, and then you have the economic element of there are rewards for building trust, and like we define building trust as facilitating a good outcome, right? So I endorse this nanny, you hire her based on my endorsement, you have a great experience and you endorse her onwards. I helped you get that great experience. I helped the nanny also to get that great experience. So there's a token reward in it for me for helping people have great experiences, get the right service provider. Meanwhile, if I'm trying to pump some service and I stake a bunch of my tokens behind it and it fails everybody that uses it, my token supply or my token endorsement is quickly going to be eaten up by the penalties. So we tried to approach it from both sides, as well as things like Sybil attacks and any sort of social engineering.
That sounds really interesting, actually.
Our CTO, my co-founder, is really the game theoretical expert.
Okay,
his PhD was in multi-agent systems, which are game theoretical by nature.
Oh, I think for me it's technical enough, to be honest.
For me, it's technical enough as well. I'm impressed I got through that pit.
Yeah. Okay. So I was also interested. So, coming from this kind of, we started this kind of interview about thinking about, the building from the Nairobi taxi model, where the question around trust was closely associated with the question around danger as well, right? Who can we trust in an environment, maybe for the driver and for the person as well, getting the taxi both. How does that translate to kind of a city like London or New York, where maybe it's not actually, we might not want to be influenced by the people most nearest to us within our initial kind of sphere of trust, maybe. And maybe that has to be, for example, like, you might not, this is kind of a bad example probably, but, you might not want to listen to music, trust your friend's music taste. You might want to something beyond that layer to try to want that risk, maybe to want to take that risk. So how does that kind of, and you can kind of see how that might translate to a financial opportunity as well, where you kind of want to go beyond your initial spheres and take greater risks elsewhere. So how might that kind of incorporate in your kind of project?
For sure. It's a great question. There's a couple things I would say here. So we definitely recognize that not all sectors are relevant in all places, right? Like in New York, in London, you don't think twice about which taxi you get into. It's probably quite irrelevant to have this detailed profile and kind of trust system for simply getting into a taxi. Well, maybe that's not true if you're a minority, if you're a marginalized person, if you're part of a community that regularly experiences sort of oppression or any violence against it. There's still a need for this, even in a market like London. But let's move to, say, a service like, okay, you don't care about your taxi, but you do care about your babysitter, who's going to watch your kid. And so to come to your next point, like, you might not want to take the word of this person, right? This is actually the fundamental point behind UTU and our theory of trust, is that there is no prescriptive model of trust that applies to everybody. Anyone or any company who claims to have some universal algorithm prescriptive for trust that says, oh, this is a 7.6 trustable person with a confidence interval of 83%, and this is nonsense. This is not how people think. I've never thought, oh, you should hire this babysitter, he has a 7.6 trustable score or something like this. We think, oh, we should hire this person because my sister and my brother have both hired them to watch their kids and said that he is absolutely great with infants and always reliable and cooks great vegetarian meals. And so that sort of descriptive model of trust that is relevant to you as an individual, focused from the people, sourced from the people that are meaningful to you, about the factors and features of the offering or of the service that are relevant to you. Like I was saying earlier, I don't care about the music in the taxi. I care about the speed, or I want a taxi that lets me smoke. things like this. So having the context of who's actually providing the review gives you a lot of that insight. And there's even things that you can tune within this to say, like, I maybe want to be more open in this area, or in this area, I want to be quite conservative. So we've toyed around with ideas around like an openness slider, where you can introduce further out recommendations beyond your bubble for a particular service or sector. Also things like anonymity protection. For instance, take a use case like in the health sector. Maybe you've been diagnosed with some condition, and it's quite specialized, and you need to see a doctor for it. You don't know who to see. You also don't want to tell the whole world that you have this condition. And probably anyone who has this condition also doesn't want to tell the whole world that they have it, and so is not so open to responding to your recommendation like that publicly, or maybe even privately. So how do you solve for this? How do you actually get the recommendation to the doctor that you need without the other person losing their privacy? So you can use something like k-anonymity, which we're building on, to say, okay, one of these 10 people, maybe you set a k value of 10 for anything to do with the medical sector. Any one of these 10 people from within your network, and we'll try to pick 10 people that you trust pretty equally as well, or we think you trust equally. One of these 10 people recommends this doctor for this service. From your perspective, getting the recommendation, you don't really care which of those 10 people it is. They're all trustable to you on this topic. And from the recommender's perspective, his true identity is obscured behind the other 9 people. And so you could set a K value at whatever level you want and apply it to whichever sectors to protect that sort of privacy. So again, all of this about privacy, about where the data gets used and how open you are with what you're shown and how your data is shown, is to be under the user's control.
That's super interesting. Yeah, the medical example is really quite interesting there. So just winding down, maybe to return to a question that we started with, is just thinking about, what do you think, reflecting on, blockchain and cryptocurrency have a particular kind of contractual, almost kind of incentive mechanism for kind of trust, right? Kind of saying people actually behave in this kind of rational way, so they won't do this. So this is how we can kind of say something is trusted. But you're kind of trying to bring in the human side of to trust, which I think is interesting, and probably is much needed to kind of realize that there needs to be some kind of human approach to trust in this. So how are you making trust more human, and how is that to be useful for the blockchain project and the crypto project? So just to go out on, basically.
Sure. Yeah. So actually our name UTU, even it's the Swahili word for humanity. So you could say that this is kind of our core focus, is bringing that human element to digital trust. What we would say is that right now, digital trust is a legacy of what eBay gave us in the 90s when they introduced pseudonymous 5-star ratings and open text reviews. Meanwhile, the entire internet has evolved around it, and the transactions that we do have evolved, but these trust mechanisms have stayed the same. The interfaces we've used, the devices we use, they've all changed, but these trust mechanisms have stayed the same since 25 years or more now. Why are we still thumbing out some long review about the thing I just bought or the person I just hired, when we can hold a phone in front of our face and record a selfie video about our experience with this service that actually captures emotion, that lets people see that it's a real person behind this that maybe they can identify with. So it's not just about the AI and trying to move to the descriptive model rather than that prescriptive, right? Getting away from the numerical scores and this and that to real feedback from real people that descriptively, but it's also about changing the user experiences that people expect and kind of have come to accept or tolerate as good enough. Just some random text box, right? More video, more badges, more interactive, and just generally more human.
Interesting. And finally, also, actually, I keep saying finally, but how is that data to be kept private, the data that you're kind of collecting as well?
Yeah, so that's again part of the decentralized protocol, is building what we call sort of like vaults or data refuges. I don't know the exact branding term that we'll use for this, but basically secure enclaves for everybody's data. Probably our CTO is the better person to go into depth about how that actually is secured, but we're still considering different systems and options for how we actually implement the data sharing. But the end goal will be the same, or the end position will be the same, is that we're building infrastructure that facilitates people to leverage that data and get the most out of it, have a better trusted experience online, not to try to own anyone's data.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thanks, Jason. So thanks for joining us, and good luck with the project. So
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm really
we'll be
happy.
keeping a close eye on how your project goes. And yeah, best of luck for the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Cheers.